Hello, I'm Neil Wengerd. I'm a partner at the branding firm Nonfiction, and I'm part of the marketing committee of the Columbus chapter of Conscious Capitalism. Conscious capitalism is a way of thinking about capitalism and business that better reflects the potential of business to make a positive impact on our community and our world. And our goal is to elevate humanity through business. As part of that, this year, we're focusing on amplifying the stories of women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, and businesses owned by people of color. And today I'm really excited to be talking with Sam Baddoo, founder of Fleri. Sam, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Neil. My name is Sam Baddoo. I'm currently a CEO and founder at Fleri. Um, Fleri remittance product that helps immigrants living abroad to buy healthcare plans for their families back. We're currently focused on Africa and African immigrants in the diaspora. I grew up in Ghana, have lived in the US over the last 6 years. I consider myself a Pan-African and definitely one who seeks to enhance life for people like me who've lived and journeyed through different parts of the world and continue to connect the different pieces of their world to support in various ways.
Yeah, and you have a really interesting story too, and maybe talk a little bit about how you got to Columbus specifically, and then I would love to dig in a little bit to the origin story of Fleri too, because I think there are a lot of interesting numbers and realizations that you had around the insurance world in particular.
Yeah. Growing up, I grew up in Ghana, like I mentioned, for most of my life until college. Then I had the chance to win a United Nations scholarship that led me to Morocco, where I spent the next 5 years of my life. During that time, I got really involved in community building and technology. Um, an interesting part of that was also the onset of social entrepreneurship and getting really fascinated by how social entrepreneurship, especially in Asia, was being used to move millions of people out of poverty, which previously wasn't seen. My thoughts were, this is something that can definitely apply to my home country of Ghana and in the greater African continent. And so in 2012, I decided to move back with a group of friends and start walking my first social entrepreneurship experience. The goal of this was to build, a commercially viable social impact business, one that would allow us to scale a business that was local to Ghana, but create international products that could rally more young people into starting their own companies there. This led a couple of years after to starting two other businesses, one of them which was a consulting company geared towards helping other startups scale beyond individual or two founders. Um, that experience, of course, got me interested in doing a lot more with my life. And I couldn't think of a better place to get that challenge than to move to America. So literally, I did move to this country primarily because I wanted to change my life. I wanted to change my opportunities, the things I worked on. So I moved here. It was a struggle initially. Lived in New York for about a year, and then moved to Columbus. In Columbus, it was a rough start, but meeting people. Uh, One of the most influential people that I've met in my personal story, Haley Burnham, and I remember when I met Haley. Yeah, so moving to Columbus was an interesting part of my life, right? Because um, it was very different from life in New York. New York, everybody is busy, moving around. In Columbus, it was meeting one person, unlocking another door, meeting the next person, and building this web of relationships that have ended up being a very solid foundation for me to find my own footing in the city. Most significant was how I met Haley, who's part of the leadership at Conscious Capitalism in Columbus. I met Haley through my work at EmpowerBuzz with Azleen, which at that time was really amazing work to uplift people who were struggling. That relationship with Haley opened lots more doors in Columbus, meeting other people, and it's been very, very influential in terms of my trajectory, in the city over time.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point, and I think you touched on a few things there, specifically on relationships and the relationships that you had when you were in Africa and the relationships that you built when you came here. And thinking about your business, Fleri, specifically, it makes me think about the complexity of that stakeholder relationship. Um, and so your primary audience is African immigrants in the United States who are in turn buying insurance for their families in Africa. So your immediate stakeholder is here, but the people who have the biggest impact are back home or their families. So how do you take into account those various stakeholders when you're planning the future of Fleri and the future of your business?
Yeah, you're very correct in looking at it this way, right? And I think the interesting two line is one, that all stakeholders are connected and have really come to appreciate. If you look at the work we did at Restart prior to Fleri, it's this idea that people are never by themselves, customers or just users or whatever term you apply to them, right? People are connected with other people, and at various points in time, they're playing different roles in an ecosystem. And so for us at Fleri, it was looking at where did we want to have the impact, right? I started this company primarily because I'd experienced a personal loss that led me to understand that the loss was not unique, however painful, but it was only a signal of what so many other people were experiencing. And in looking at the people who are experiencing that, the millions of people who die in Africa every year, as a result of that lack of access to quality healthcare, so many of them were already being financed and supported by families, and individuals just like myself living here, right? And so if that's where we wanted to have an impact, and they were connected to these people who were very much trying to have an impact on them and support them, then it showed that it was the threads that connected them, the systems that did not exist that really could be built, right? And that was the opportunity that we saw, to look at an ecosystem of stakeholders and build a system that was strengthening those connections, providing accountability, but most importantly, bringing a much more efficient channel to create that desired outcome, right? Which in this case is moving more people towards better access to healthcare, right, than we previously had, while using the same, ideologies or the same motivations to achieve them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that idea, that very well articulated purpose of getting healthcare to more people, um, is like I said, very well articulated. And you touched on a couple of things: personal loss, and then kind of the idea of trying to have this greater mission. How did all of that influence the founding of Fleri, and how does it start to continue to influence Fleri today? How does that keep you focused?
I think one of the ways it does that is having a higher purpose. That's extremely important. I'm a conscious capitalism believer through and through. Um, way before I even knew what conscious capitalism was, it's this idea that, you know, social entrepreneurship, and I see myself as a social entrepreneur, the path that I decided to take was all about, using the same fundamentals and foundations of capitalist business, right, to serve the higher purpose of, you know, scalable impact. And so for me, it keeps me really grounded that what we're trying to achieve is not, more revenue. It's not, you know, popularity. It's really how do we scale impact, right? And just to kind of focus on, what that really looks like. 6 million people every year die from really basic, you know, lack of access to care. Like, we're not talking major operations. We're not talking huge, unpronounceable, diseases. It's things like hypertension. It's things like malaria. It's things like typhoid, bilharzia, stuff like that. Right? Very curable, very preventable, very manageable. This is what kills a lot of people, right? Malnutrition, and we're trying to have an effect on that 6 million. If in my lifetime over the next 10 years, um, we can move that number down 1 million, that's the kind of impact that we are trying to achieve. And it is very humbling to look at where we're starting from and how much more we have to do. And that keeps me very grounded and focused that the work that it lies ahead of us is a lot.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Having a mission like that you stay focused on, that gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning, but then drives your whole company, I think is so crucial, because what you're doing when you're dealing with saving lives, it's easy to get discouraged or to kind of feel like you're not having an impact. But if you save one life, like you said, if you take a chunk out of that top number, you've had an impact. And so remembering that's why you're here is so important. So in the health, you're being in the healthcare industry, the insurance industry, what did 2020 look like for you? How did the pandemic impact what you're doing?
So the pandemic gave birth to what we were doing, right? My grandmother passed away in February. Um, that grieving period was enlightening for me, right? Talking to other people and knowing for several reasons that, one, the pandemic laid bare, the disparities that we have in healthcare. Um, people here were just as terrified, just as worried. But regardless of however we feel about the healthcare system in the US, it is 1 million times better than the healthcare that we have in Africa, right? And there are social, infrastructure, social policies that are in place to provide some support. We're all beneficiaries of, the stimulus checks that they gave, right? If you think about it, who's given a stimulus check in any country in Africa, right? How are people even getting tested? We get tested a lot over here, and mostly for free. In the initial stages of the pandemic, people back home in Ghana and Nigeria had to pay for their own testing. What is the end result of that? It simply means that a lot more people, even when they have COVID, are just going to continue doing what they're doing every single day, because there's no incentive to go pay something so expensive that cost 4 weeks' salary, right? To go get tested. Nobody's doing that. And
Right.
for families here who have their loved ones back home, that's a major source of worry, right? And not having a way to provide them care except a reactive way, which is just sending money when they've already contracted the disease, are already probably critically ill, and not much can be done, then you're not really having an impact, right? Second is the fact that with the pandemic, a lot more people living here, immigrants, lost their jobs, just like a lot of people. They tend to work in a lot of the frontline work. They tend to do the cleaning in places. They tend to do a lot of the work that was risky. So as people are losing wages, there's a greater need for them to efficiently use their resources, which means that seeing how people back home rely on their families here to send them money, there's less money that goes, right? Less money that's available. But the interesting part about this is over decades, it's been proving that the more difficult the economic situation is in emerging countries and even globally, it is actually asymmetrical to the aid or the remittances that are sent by relatives, which means that because there's a greater need, immigrants have to suffer or sacrifice more to send to their families back home. For us, that was an impetus for what we're building, because what we're trying to do is to create a much more efficient system to avoid the 9 to 12% in fees that you pay to a money transfer company just to send money back home, and the middlemen that have to be gone through, right? And instead, provide a way for you to directly offer healthcare, which is what people needed most during the pandemic, right? And that for us was an opportune moment to build something like this that did not exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So building on that, and as 2020 being the impetus for the entire initiative, where do you see 2021 going? What do you see as your biggest hurdles to really build the company over the next year?
2021 is about validating, to the larger extent, the need that we recognize to understand our customers, our members, the immigrants who live here and live abroad in different places, right? And the needs that they have to fulfill support to their families. Where are they spending money today? Where are they, you know, most in need of support? Right? We understand a lot. I understand a lot living this very experience, but also it's an opportunity for us to really move beyond our primary pilots, right, in Ghana and in Nigeria, to really expand this as an opportunity. We've already seen how much it is impacting lives in Ghana, how much is impacting lives in Nigeria. But the problems are everywhere throughout Africa, right? And the diaspora is huge. And so it's about being able to scale to different countries after 2021. But right now, what we're trying to do is to deeply understand the people that we're serving,
Mhm.
and to be able to care more for their families.
Yeah, going deeper into who these stakeholders are, what they need, and how you can best help them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of getting involved, how can our community help you? How can we get involved with Fleri?
I think there are a number of ways that the local Columbus community or conscious capitalism, even as an organization, can support. Right. The first one is in finding more ways to spread the message. Um, Very often, we all know someone who comes from a different country. We all probably know someone who is from someplace in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but rarely do we have an opportunity to say, hey, I want to speak to this person that I know who is from Ghana about something, that impacts his life. And I think this is a very, very good opportunity to kind of get to know these people that we meet and know throughout our city, right? What are their experiences like? How are their families surviving to a pandemic? What are they having to do to help them, right? If you know someone from Zimbabwe, then you probably know um, it's just as hard to get oxygen in places like Zimbabwe, right? Or respirators or ventilators, during a time like this. Um, how do we support that? How do we rally around? And so creating awareness is one of them. Most people that I talk to are like, how come I've never heard about this? Yeah, that's why we're doing this. It's not been available, right? So that's one. Number two is highlighting a little bit deeper what immigrant communities are going through at a time like this. Uh, we all are trying to get as many people as possible vaccinated. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of worry, but the situation is even more dire in the countries where they come from. Engaging these communities also has the side benefit of giving them more arsenal in their toolkits to be able to talk to their families back home and influence them to get vaccinated. Why? Because as we all get vaccinated globally, it actually decreases reoccurrence across, because people are constantly traveling. Those are some of the ways that I can think of. And then generally in creating opportunities for Fleri as well to connect with people who might have that experience, whether it's in insurance, in healthcare, in public health, in the nonprofit world. These are people that we would love to talk to, who influence the way in which we're thinking about the product and iterating.
Excellent. Yeah, empathy and making sure we understand everyone's life experiences are not our own. That's so important. Sam, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. Anybody that wants to learn more can go to joinfleri.com and check out Fleri. Thanks, Sam.
All right, I appreciate it very much.